grateful to be past that because truly, I did not think I could get on that flight. It was anytime someone would ask me about like the, upcoming trip to Hawaii, I was like, oh, the kids are really excited was the way I would kind of like pivot because meanwhile, I'm like, don't ask me. I don't want to tell you the honest truth, which is like, I don't really want to get on that plane. But like I truly have come a long way because I didn't realize like, I didn't know what I didn't know. And for me, like ignorance is not bliss in this space.
All right, folks, welcome back to the From the Flight Deck podcast brought to you by Dial a Pilot. And today I'm here with Britt Leiser. Britt is from Cleveland, Ohio. She came to us back in February after a flight out to Hawaii made her a little bit nervous. And so we started working together. She's done some individual calls with Captain Mav, Britt Cookston, and with myself and some one of the group courses back in March as well. And Britt's been a great friend. We've gotten to talk to her kids a little bit about their interest in aviation. And so Britt, first of all, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I'm glad to be here.
Perfect. So tell us, what was it when you had that flight back in February? You're going to or from Hawaii?
So I actually contacted Captain Britt before the flight to Hawaii because I was so nervous about it. My family and I were taking we were taking the kids to Hawaii for my college roommate's wedding. And I was very excited about it. And the kids were all excited about it. But as the months led up to it, my excitement was dwarfed by how scared I was about the flight. And for context, I was never afraid of flying before I had kids. And then once I did, it's interesting, like I had most of my kids pre-pandemic. So, I didn't really know because I didn't realize that fear was there because no one flew anywhere during COVID. And then when the world reopened, all of a sudden it's like, okay, let's hop on flights again. And I remember I got on a flight just by myself for a trip and I panicked. I got off the flight and I looked at my friend and I was like, did you feel the turbulence? And they looked at me like, what turbulence? But meanwhile, I was ashen, like completely I was really afraid.
Nervous,
so yeah. It was weird. So I reached out to some friends before our flight to Hawaii and somebody recommended Dial a Pilot. And they're like, hey, you ought to talk to a pilot, just like get your questions answered. So I did that. Yeah. Captain Britt was who I talked to. And it was really, really helpful because he kind of helped me understand that this was like a learned fear that I had. It wasn't something that happened in my life per se, other than being a mom. But the thing I really loved, he talked about like how just all the different training and certification, the pilots that you guys go through, especially medically, like how you need to constantly keep, up to date with everything. So that helped me like feel more trusting of the process. But the thing that I thought was great is he kind of continued to make sure that I remember just like how amazing, it's such a miracle to be able to fly in the air. And he's like, you're going to be flying with your kids. It's important that they see the miracle flight, so I had that in the back of my mind as we were flying to Hawaii, because I might be a little afraid, but they're completely comfortable and they trust it implicitly. And I used to too. So that was kind of his message is like, let me walk you through what you can expect and what those flights might look like. And it really did help me. Because as I was flying, I just anytime we hit a bump of turbulence, I just kept reminding myself this is just inconvenient. It's just uncomfortable, but it's fine. The plane's fine.
Right.
So it made my trip much better because I then enjoyed myself and wasn't panicked about the return. So that's what brought me to Dial a Pilot.
There you go. Yeah. Brett is fantastic. He, so famously, if you talk to him, he may have told you this too, Britt, but what he told me the first time I ever talked to him is that his nickname is Maverick, kind of like Top Gun, Tom Cruise, Maverick. But he's like, I got the nickname first. I was born before Top Gun came out. His parents gave it to him when he was very young. So if you ever talk to him and you talk to him, and he brings that up, you can call him Mav. He's a phenomenal guy. He's got a great sense of humor, really fun to engage with. And he's got an amazing career. Every time I talk to him, and of course I talk to him weekly, I learn a new part of his career. He's owned a skydiving shop. He's been a flight instructor. He was a designated pilot examiner at one of his last airlines. He's a captain now. He's just a fascinating guy, and he loves aviation. I mean, that passion is just absolutely there. Every time I talk to him, I get more and more excited about aviation. And I wasn't sure that there was any more of that cup to be filled, but somehow Mav does it. So I love his approach to it, and getting other people excited about it and getting the kids excited and things of that nature. But one of the things you mentioned, and this is something that I hear on almost every single one of the calls that we do, is I was never afraid of flying until enter variable. And that variable is oftentimes until I became a parent, until I got married. The big one that I always hear is until you became a parent. And so your oldest, you said, is 7. So I got to do the math real quick. So what's that? 2017 he was born. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's just
Yeah. Awesome. So all of a sudden, yeah, COVID happens in 2020. Nobody's flying. One of the stories that I have from that time frame is we were flying an airplane from San Francisco to Boston. It was a Boeing 757-300 that seats something like 224 passengers. And we're getting ready to leave the gate. Gate agent comes on and says, "Okay, we're all boarded up. We got 9 people." And I thought, oh, this is going to be a problem. So that was the first time I ever thought, man, all right, well, maybe I'll go be a realtor or whatever it was going to be for the next couple years, thinking we were going to get furloughed. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for a number of factors. But anyways, that is completely besides the point. All that to say, yeah, you stopped flying for a little while. And Kristen, who was on one of our last episodes, said the same thing. I stopped flying. I didn't have to think about it. It was really nice. All of a sudden, post-COVID, we're getting back on airplanes. We're maybe a little bit sensitive about being close to other folks. And yeah, it's just something that kind of wasn't in the repertoire of what we were doing recently. So, Britt, your story is certainly not one that falls on deaf ears. There's a lot of folks that have gone through that same thing. So have you found recently that you've been able to travel with a lot more confidence after kind of having, understood a little bit more about aviation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think a lot of it is just like I'm very numbers driven. So I did the course, the group course back in March, and it was so helpful looking at all the statistics behind the safety of aviation, and that really helped me. I think it's almost like fear of the unknown too. It's like twofold. It's fear of what I don't know, and then also there's all these little people, depending on me now. So it's just this weird, anxiety that hit. But the more I learn, the better I feel, actually. And I think the podcast really helped me too. Sometimes before a flight, like I'll listen to the turbulence one again. That's kind of one of my favorites because I know what's happening, but it's interesting to know like what kinds of turbulence. I never knew that. Like I never understood that there were even different kinds. So that's really helpful
Right.
when I'm in the air, like, okay, I know what's happening. And I feel after that trip back from Hawaii, I remember I turned to my husband and I was like, I feel 100 pounds lighter. Like I can go anywhere now. Whereas before, like I was finding myself making excuses for why I wasn't going to go somewhere. Like, I don't really want to do that anymore, which is sad because that was never the case before at all. Like I love to fly. I never even thought about it. So it's really, really comforting to now, get on a flight and just know what's going to happen and just trust the process and kind of just sit back. And that I really didn't think was possible. What was it, 7 months ago?
Right.
I really didn't think I could do that.
Wow. And prior to this 2017, no fear of flying,
No,
never a worry for you. Really?
no incident, like nothing. And I think it's becoming apparent. And I think it's also just social media. If there's like my dad always uses this analogy. He's like, if you watch the 5 o'clock news and then watch it on repeat at 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock, by the end of the day, you're going to be panicked about all these things that, but the reality is like that social media. My point is social media just kind of makes things so much more amplified that you can be convinced that the world is ending depending on what you're looking at. And I think, if there's one tiny thing to latch onto with a negative news story, now that we're all so aware of it, I just think the fear mongering starts. So I think maybe that's in conjunction with, that only fed to the anxiety, I think.
Totally. And, it's interesting from my own perspective. Something happened to us relatively recently. This was probably a month and a half ago. I posted a video about Dutch roll. There was a flight that had Dutch roll. It was a 737 MAX. So, of course, the news really kind of ran with it. And so I got a lot of messages saying, hey, what is this? And so I made a video about it. It was about a minute and 15 seconds or so. And I just tried to explain, hey, this is what Dutch roll is. This is why it's really not a big deal, but it's obviously something that the airplane is designed to not have happen to it. And if it does, that's a problem because it shouldn't have that happen. One of the systems failed. We land the airplane, we get that system fixed. No big deal. That's kind of how the whole process came together. Well, where I'm going with this is when I made that video, I made it, and it probably wasn't the best one I ever made as far as being able to answer a question. Well, answering a question like that in 60 seconds or, 75 seconds in this case is not that easy. And so, especially with a complex, hey, we're talking high altitude aerodynamics, high performance aircraft, like to get it in a way that you can really understand it quickly is something that I've really tried to do, but it can be a little bit challenging. So when we made it, it kind of there were more questions than answers in the comments that we got, and it got blown up. It went viral. And I saw that and thought, this is how this happens. We are in the business of not trying to fearmonger, and we are rewarded when we accidentally do. And so it was one of those moments of realization, like, this really is how the algorithm works. And so, of course, we try not to do that, and we try and, have our stuff perform well because it's actually helping people. And that's how we're getting comments and say, all the stuff that the algorithm likes. But it was a really interesting thing to see. And so now when I see stuff on my own social media and my own, day of scrolling, it's interesting to see what actually pops up. But Britt, we're getting tagged and stuff constantly. What's happening here? How is this happening? And so trying to be able to explain that. And, from my own angle, being a professional pilot and the folks that I get to work with, of course, we see something and go, oh, okay, well, this is because X, Y, and Z. But if you don't know that, or you don't have somebody around that can, have that conversation with you, it makes it a lot more difficult to understand that, yes, somebody was injured in turbulence, but here's how the airplane was okay. Here's how they got the airplane on the ground. This is the different systems and, techniques that we use to mitigate the impacts of turbulence and mitigate the risk and threats associated with it, and so on and so forth. So, I think, again, your story is something that all of us see, whether it's, somebody like myself that, of course, is not afraid of flying, but it makes it seem like, oh, wow, there's a lot that goes on out there, even though this year we're scheduled to have 40.1 million flights fly around the world. And 20 years ago, the number was something like 24 million. So we just have so many airplanes taking off every single day that when some small thing does happen, it's really easy to fearmonger it and kind of just add to that fire of anxiety around air travel. So, yeah, not surprised to hear that in the slightest.
There's so much speculation out there too, and now it's all just amplified. So you just see it so much more, and I think you see it in any type of industry, but since that's a particular fear of mine, or was, I just I'd see one detail and be like, oh, well, of course that's going to happen on my next flight. I'm going to be on that flight or something. So it's not rational, but it happens, and I think that just between that's what I'm seeing, and that's what the algorithm likes to deliver, right? That's what continues to get you scroll. So between that and then obviously being a parent and feeling responsible for something, you're like, oh man, do I really want to do this? So, but I'm grateful to be past that, because truly, I did not think I could get on that flight. It was anytime someone would ask me about like the, upcoming trip to Hawaii, I was like, oh, the kids are really excited was the way I would kind of like pivot, because meanwhile, I'm like, don't ask me. I don't want to tell you the honest truth, which is like, I don't really want to get on that plane. But like I truly have come a long way, because I didn't realize, like, I didn't know what I didn't know. And for me, like, ignorance is not bliss in this space. I really needed to know more to be able to trust the engineering of it and the science of it. And then I remember, like, even in an early call or something, it was like you or Joey or somebody was like, oh, just so you know, the pilots are not afraid. We're not afraid. You might be, but we are not. And that did mentally sit with me, where I was like, oh, okay. Why should I be if you're not? You're not on the same plane.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that Joey pointed out in one of our episodes where we talked about turbulence, and I thought it was a really good way to put it, was we're never afraid of we're not afraid of turbulence. We're not afraid of, the unknown, effectively, because we do have so much control over what's going on there. And the systems and the redundancy on the airplane to make sure that we are always going to be in a safe environment. The FAA would not let us go fly, from San Francisco to Hawaii, which is actually one of the farthest routes that we do away from land. Because there's no in-between point there. So we have to go out and dispatch with a specific amount of time available to fly on a failed engine all the way down at 10,000 feet back to the airport that we took off from the farthest way point of land or I'm sorry, farthest away point on the flight plan that we possibly can. This is all called ETOPS, extended operations. And that specifically, that point I'm talking about is called the critical point, the farthest point away we can be. At that point, we can have an engine failure, have to descend the airplane, turn back around. We have plenty of gas to get back to the airport and deal with anything that we need to. So those are the kind of things that are going through our minds, the pilots, when we're thinking about the risk mitigation. Hey, is this the right airplane on the right day with the right crew and the right group of passengers to go in the right weather, importantly, to go actually accomplish this mission? If any of those answers are no, there is no penalty for us saying, I'm not taking the airplane today. Or we're not taking the flight today. We can call in fatigued. We can call in sick. Nobody calls us and says, what were you doing? There's no pressure to go. It's really one of the biggest safety features that we have in the aviation world. And we do have a go accomplish the job mindset, right? I mean, that's kind of the nature of, I would say, most humans. You want to accomplish what's in front of you, but the pilots are given every single opportunity to stop and say, actually, no, we're not going to take this flight. Our risk mitigation profile does not allow for us to do this with a completely safe, operational window that we want to accept. For example, flying into somewhere like Boston and it's snowing and there's ice on the runway, we can actually look and see, okay, what are the braking values there? How fast can we stop the airplane once we land it? And if those braking values aren't appropriate for what the airplane that we have that day, we're simply not going to go. Not only that, though, the pilots aren't the only ones looking at this. Our dispatchers are looking at this. Our maintainers are looking at this. And so anybody can make that no-go decision, which is really, really important. So it's one of the things that I'm so proud of in the aviation industry is the teamwork that goes into this and the camaraderie of, let's get the job done if we can. But if we can't, let's not force anything and let's not take any unnecessary risks. That's important. Another thing that what you said brought up in my mind was on the turbulence stuff. And one of the things that we are worried about when we're actually out flying from a turbulence perspective is making sure that the passengers and the cabin crew are in their seats with their seatbelts fastened when appropriate. So with the passengers, because there's 360 of them on the airplane that I'm flying now, that seatbelt sign we're a little more liberal with, if you will. So we're going to turn it on when it's just light chop, maybe moderate chop, but we're not going to have the flight attendants sit down at that point. The flight attendants are still doing their service, walking up and down the cabin, taking care of folks' needs, whatever it is. But once we start to get into a little bit further along that turbulence flow, if you will, where we go from light chop to moderate chop to light turbulence, moderate turbulence, severe turbulence, that's how we classify all of them in order from lowest impact to most severe impact. Along that line, we'll make the decision to have the flight attendants seated. Now, there was data years ago that came out and said, hey, flight attendant injuries are happening in turbulence. So we need to mitigate that risk as much as we can. And so all of the airlines came together and said, okay, let's come up with a system in which we can actually have the flight attendants sit down when we need them to, whether it be in the aisle or in their jump seats if they have enough time to get back to them. So we make announcements along those lines as well. And I hear from folks on our calls quite frequently that really scares people. And the intent is not to scare people, of course. It's more so to say, hey, we're just going into a little bit of turbulence. Again, the airplane's going to be fine. But what can happen is somebody can fall over. They can break a collarbone. They can spill hot coffee. Anything that's not a simple fracture of a finger or nose toe or more than a second-degree burn is an aircraft accident. So the FAA actually classifies that as an accident when something like that happens. So we're just always in the business of mitigating that risk down to the lowest possible level, which is why when you're on board the airplane, you may hear things like, asking for the flight attendants to take jump seats, things of that nature. Again, not meant to be something that scares people, meant to be something that just continues to raise that bar of safety throughout the entirety of aviation. That's always the goal. No matter how good it was last year, we want to make it even better this year. So just something to point out from some of the calls that I've had recently that I figure may help some folks.
Yeah, I know that helps me. Because I think like that does induce panic when I hear that, flight attendants take the jump seats. All of a sudden it's like, all right, well, now I have reason to be worried. But that's been one of the things that's been helpful about this course and the podcast is like learning all the different sounds we'll hear or like what the chimes mean and like what those kinds of instructions are actually implied for. So yeah, I always tell my kids, I'm like, strap in. Even if you don't have to, like, even if the seatbelt sign is off, just keep it on. What harm is it really doing? So that I learned. I thought that was a really good tip, actually.
Totally. Yeah. No, thank you. And one of the other things that I've talked about recently, I don't remember if this is on one of the episodes or not, but anyways, it was when we're in the front and we're flying the airplane, we have our seatbelts on all the time. So whether or not the seatbelt sign is on, we are in our seats with our seatbelt fastened. We have a 5-point harness up there, so we got 2 over the shoulder and then 3 down low, and so we keep the down low part on while we're actually in the air flying the airplane. So, it's like, well, if we're doing it, it seems like everybody should do it. And it's, again, just one of those things that I always like to tell folks, hey, your safety in your hand is in your hands on the airplane as well. And the one thing that you can really do to control it is just fasten that seatbelt when you're seated. And again, this doesn't mean, not getting up and using the lav and going to getting refreshments and things of that nature, but it's just be wise and, pay attention to what's going on around you because you do have a say in how things go. And I think that brings a lot of comfort to folks too that, don't like giving up control on the airplane. Well, you do have control. It's just not actually flying the airplane, but the people that are flying the airplane. And this is another thing that Mav likes to point out is, hey, we do this all the time and we train for this and we go back to the simulators and we're doing engine failures and fires and evacuations and, all the stuff that you can think of. And we're extremely passionate about it. And I think that really is another thing. When I talk to Mav, I'm like, that's a really good point that we have tried to make clear kind of in the pursuit of this service is that if you're a person that doesn't like to give up control and you get on the airplane and turn right and go to your seat and you never see who's actually flying, well, of course you're going to be a little bit nervous. Let's make the human relationship that we got this. We're happy to be here today. We're ready to go fly. We're well rested. We're not ill emotionally. We're in check. We're going to go fly this airplane. And there's so many different things that go into making sure that we are in that right headspace to fly the airplane. There's always 2 of us minimum up there, actually flying. So just 2 sets of eyes. On the longer stuff, we're doing 3 or 4 sets of eyes up in the front of the airplane. So all of those things come together, and it's just really nice to be able to kind of share that in a forum like this and say, hey, no, we're really happy to be doing this, and you're in good hands no matter what airline you're on, whether it's day, night, anything like that. So all of the things that you say kind of resonates with me that, yeah, this is really cool that we have the opportunity to kind of share this stuff and help folks in their travel journey just feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I never thought about this as a fear until I had like that moment. But the amount of people I've now talked to who can relate to this in terms of like, oh yeah, I wasn't worried about it, and then became a parent, or then did, I don't know, you name it, and now they're a little bit worried. I think it's so helpful. I keep encouraging them, like, this call is so helpful for me because even just to like go through what Captain Brett did is like walk me through what to expect on the flight to Hawaii. Then I wasn't flying blind in the sense from like, okay, I can expect this here probably, and this, that, that's just so helpful. I didn't even know this was like something we could do, but I've learned so much from, these courses and also from other people who shared their experiences too. And the things that they were worried about never even crossed my mind and vice versa. And it's like, oh, interesting. We're all just trying to like figure it out. And it is fun to learn about.
Right, right. Yeah, it's fun. And it's so fun, from my angle of things too, just to be able to talk with everybody. And it's raised my game as a pilot for sure. Cause I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm thinking about it from a perspective of somebody that doesn't know what's going on. And when we are encountering turbulence, changing my PAs to kind of soothe that anxiety instead of kind of just, checking the box and telling folks to sit down. So no, I think it's just been such a great kind of organic relationship amongst all of us. And it is so interesting to see. One of the things that I did not expect was the camaraderie amongst the folks that were taking the course and the support that was offered, from one person to another, and the group chats that go on and talk. Okay, I'm flying to London today. Everybody say, okay, you got this. We're tracking your flight. So it's really just fun to see that. And all these people that have never met before really kind of taking it on themselves to support each other and be encouraging. So that's something that I thought was just fantastic to see as well. So, as Britt, of course, thanks for being a part of that. One of the other things on that note is you reached out to me. This was a couple months ago now about your son, Gavin. And all of a sudden he had quite the interest in aviation going on.
Yeah, it was so cute. He was asking me all sorts of questions, and I was taking the course at the time, the group course. So I was like, oh, okay. He was asking me how planes actually fly. He's like, Mom, they're so heavy. I don't understand this. And I was like, oh, you know what? And you do all these videos, and I showed him the Instagram too. And it was so cool. He actually sat there and watched. You had a video where you were, in one of the smaller planes, like from start to finish. So he watched that with me and he was so interested. And then, I just told you, I was like, hey, thanks for doing that, because he loved it. My kids watch things on YouTube or learn things, like they're just sponges. They like to explore. And then, then you sent him his own little video, and it made his day. But it's so neat because it really has gotten him so interested in what he can do in the future. And so it's just fun. It was such an amazing thing.
Yeah, no, it's so fun to hear that stuff too. Because one of the things that we love, and when we're actually out flying the airplane, is when people come up and say hi and introduce themselves. And kids, of course, especially because they come up and they're so excited and they want to push all the buttons and grab the controls and all that stuff. So it was really fun to be able to connect with Gavin and hear his excitement. And I mean, I just saw so much of myself and him at that age, with just the passion for aviation and the curiosity and how do these things fly. Such an engineering mindset, I would think, which I personally do not have. But it was so fun to be able to share that with him, and be on the other side of that kind of coin, where when I was looking up at when I was little, walking around the airport, I was just blown away with the aviators that were walking around and all of the crew members, and so excited to see them and talk to them, that it's surreal to be on the other side, honestly. And all of a sudden doing that for other kids is like, wow, this is really cool. And this actually does happen. When you're young, my thought process was kind of like, oh, maybe this will happen. And then sure enough, it does. So it was just so fun and rewarding for me to talk to Gavin. And you guys sent me a nice picture that Gavin drew. I got it hanging up on my office right over here. So it's just a fun reminder that this is, in my opinion, the coolest job in the world. It's so much fun to do. We're so lucky to get to have the opportunity to go do this. And, of course, delays and waiting on gates and things like that can slow that down a little bit. But at the end of the day, getting to talk to folks like Gavin and yourself and hear those stories makes it all fun and so worth it. So now I'm kind of getting on a soapbox, but no, I just appreciate the opportunity to speak with him and work with you, of course. And I look forward to continuing to do that in the future. But one other question I had for you: you just got back from another trip. How'd your flight go there? Any anxiety going into it?
So we just got back. My husband and I just got back from a trip to Mexico, and I was a little nervous leading up to it, again, because I wasn't flying with my kids. Anytime I fly without them, I have this like, oh man, okay, moment. But no, it really went well. And honestly, like leading up to it, I remember thinking like, I never really worry about flights any other day except for like the day before I fly. And so it occurred to me, I'm like, people do this all the time. This is what we talk about all the time. And, these group courses and the podcast. And no, it went great. It went great. And I think I turned a major corner. I mean, I definitely turned a corner back after the Hawaii trip, but after this one, I was like, yeah, I got this. I can. And so actually I'm flying out to California in a few weeks, and all by myself. And I'm like, that's fine. I got it. Yeah, went really well. And, and it's not to say there are small, like turbulent bumps throughout the flight, but I'm smooth sailing for me now.
That's amazing. Do you even notice the turbulence now, or is it more something that all of a sudden you'll kind of come back up from your book and go, oh, I guess it's bumpy now?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll notice. I mean, I'll notice, like, if it's very noticeable, I'll notice it, but I'm not like sweating profusely like I used to. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm not as panicked about it. We do I listen to podcasts, or I'll bring a book. Like, I know what works for me and what helps me, stay distracted during the flight. But I've learned like that's just kind of part of aviation, and that you guys can handle it, so I kind of like defer that responsibility to you guys and trust the team up there. And I think that's what's been so helpful, is for me to learn all that goes into being a pilot and all that continues to go into staying a pilot, and all the training and even preparation for the flights. Like I should have assumed, but I didn't really know all that goes into, like, you step into the cockpit, like all the different things that you're thinking about for that specific flight. Those are things that I love learning about, like, that your team shares, because we don't know that as passengers. And so I go in thinking, oh gosh, I don't know what's going to go wrong. But now I'm like, oh, this is going to be fine. You guys already have this mapped out, and it's my job just to sit there and get excited about where I'm going. So no, it doesn't faze me as much anymore. And nor would I say like the travel delays and all that. I know they're inconvenient, but I didn't know all that goes into it behind the scenes, and really understanding the impact of like why delays happen and why, you know, the airlines are looking like everything they're really looking at. So it's really interesting. It's completely changed the way I like go walk in an airport.
Right. Yeah, no, and you brought up all the things that kind of go into flying before we actually go fly the airplane. And so just to briefly touch on that, if you haven't heard that from us before we ever get to the airport, um, I might have cut out there for a second. Before we ever get to the airport, we actually are dispatchers who sit at the headquarters across the nation, depending on the airline, of course. They're looking at all the flights that are going on throughout the day for our individual airlines. And so they're looking and saying, okay, Britt's flight is going from Cleveland to San Francisco. Let's see what's been going on prior. Let's see what's going on actively as far as the weather goes, what airplanes are already flying on it. They're looking at the airplane specifically that we are actually taking on that route. Maintenance wise, is it all up to speed? Is it the perfect airplane on the perfect day? That's what we're always trying to figure out. And if the answer is no, of course, some of these airlines have thousands of airplanes, so we swap the airplane out to a different one. We can take the one that isn't the perfect one that day. We can take that into maintenance, get something sorted out, whether it's something like a hydraulic system issue, that controls the landing gear and the flight controls, or something even smaller like a seat back is broken and we're now in the place that we can actually get that repaired. So they're looking at things like that. And just for everybody's awareness, I can understand that thought process can maybe invoke some anxiety. The FAA, along with the producer of the airplanes, along with the airlines, actually have maintenance manuals that dictate how far, or essentially they dictate what we can and cannot fly with. And it's very specific. It's down to the letter. You can take this issue flying. You cannot take this issue flying. And when I'm talking about an issue, I'm talking about something like a very, very backup system that is not going to be a factor, but needs to be repaired in the next 10 days. That's what the FAA can allow us to go do. So we can go through that process. The dispatchers are going to then plan the flight. They're going to tell us the fuel load that they think is appropriate for that day. We actually don't top the airplane tanks off like you do in your car, maybe going on a road trip. We only take the necessary fuel because for us to climb the airplane from 0 feet to 36,000 feet, it takes fuel for us to take weight to altitude. So for us, carrying extra gas does not actually mean that we have that extra gas to burn. We're burning it, carrying it to altitude, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon, but that's the idea. So then they send us all of that information. And then when we get to the airport, the pilots, we review all of that information. Okay, do we agree with the dispatcher that today is the perfect day for this flight? This is the perfect airplane for this flight. This is the perfect fuel load. Is it the right weather? So on and so forth. And if we agree with them, then we can say, okay, yes, we'll sign this off. And the captain and the dispatcher sign that flight plan off, and they share the legal responsibility for it. So now we go to the airplane, we start pre-flighting the airplane. Okay, we know, that this airplane is in perfect maintenance condition. We can actually ensure all of that. We're doing all of our system checks up there. We're briefing the flight attendants, just getting ourselves ready for the day, talking to air traffic control. What can we expect? Getting the clearance. Because when we take off, we have very specific lateral routes, so we need to fly, very specific vertical routes, so we need to fly. So just coordinating all of that, because there's other airplanes in the system. There's tens of thousands of airplanes at any given time. So that's what we're doing the whole time prior to getting to the airplane. And then once we're actually there, getting everything set up. So we're taught, you may have heard on a PA announcement before, okay, folks, we're all ready up front, but we're just waiting on some paperwork. That's the final paperwork that comes across and says, we're good to go. We have confirmed that everything is what we thought it was going to be, like we flight planned for. We now know exactly how many passengers are on the airplane, exactly how many bags are on the airplane. That final number gets pushed to us because, again, carrying weight to altitude requires a specific amount of fuel. So then we need to know how much weight is on this airplane specifically. That changes our takeoff performance numbers. That changes our landing performance numbers, the fuel we need, so on and so forth. So that all comes together. And when we talk about waiting for the paperwork, that's what we're talking about. So once we actually get pushed off the gate, now it gets to the easy part of actually flying the airplane. And flying the airplane is kind of a learned skill. It's like driving a car. It may not be the easiest thing at first, but once you get it, it really comes together pretty quickly. And then it comes technique, getting a smooth landing always ends up being the goal, because you could have the perfect flight, save 5,000 pounds of gas. You got there, everybody there 20 minutes early. But if you have a hard landing, nobody's going to remember what the other stuff that went on, and the rest of the flight crew is going to make fun of you. So, there is kind of that pridefulness that goes into it too, and making sure that we are delivering a good product. So Britt, that is kind of, in a much longer version, what we share in the group course and talking about, each one of those specific processes. But, I just wanted to share that for the listeners. And anything that I shared in the group course that I maybe missed there that's coming to mind?
I know you guys have your tablets, like your iPads. So that's really interesting. Like it's like preloaded with all the different stuff, like turbulence forecasts and all those things. And yeah, I just think that in general, just the amount of preparation that goes into each flight, specifically for that, duration. I didn't know that. And I think that's
Right.
what I realized. Like, I don't know anything about this stuff. And the more I learn, the more I feel better about it. And I think it's interesting, but I also am like, okay, they've got it covered. Like I can trust better that, you guys are thinking through everything.
Yeah, it's so well thought out. I mean, I've been doing this now professionally for 9 years, and it continues to amaze me at how well set up it is. The system just works like a well-oiled machine. And so, yeah, on the iPad Note, we have turbulence forecasting apps. We have turbulence live reporting apps. So we have one app that actually will take the accelerometer data from the iPad when it's mounted in the airplane and downlink it and upload it to all the other pilots that are out flying so that they can actually see, oh, okay, Kyle's 777 was flying at 34,000 feet and they encountered light chop at this altitude this long ago. And they can see, well, we're flying through that same exact spot in the next 20 minutes. We should turn that seatbelt sign on. So there's another thing. If you're ever flying and it's perfectly smooth and the seatbelt sign comes on, normally it's because somebody, whether it's the iPad and those apps or the air traffic controllers, have said, hey, this is what you got coming up. Expect light chop at these altitudes. We'll climb the airplane, descend the airplane to try and get to some smoother air, which will often change things. So if you're ever out flying, you have that turbulence going on, you hear the engine spool up or down. There you go. That's a really good indication that we're now changing that altitude to one, get away from turbulence, or two, we actually burn less fuel the higher that we fly. So it becomes an economics thing as well, as far as maintaining the highest efficiency of the airplane. We always try and land with as much gas as we possibly can. So there's a number of reasons that we change the altitudes, but those are some big ones. Turbulence kind of being the primary driver of that. So, no, thanks for pointing that out. Britt, if you had any advice for somebody that's starting to experience that fear of flying or has experienced it for a long time, what advice would you give somebody?
I mean, I really think like acknowledging it and opening yourself up there to talk to a pilot is so helpful. I really do. And I think the one-on-one, I mean, depending on kind of what your personality is, for me the one-on-one thing was awesome because then I didn't feel embarrassed. I could like actually be honest about, okay, well this freaks me out or this doesn't, or here's why I feel this. And I didn't feel like I was being silly. I actually could have somebody walk me through things. So I thought that was a game changer for me. Um, but then, in the event that somebody else might like a group course setting, I've now done both. And I think that also is nice too, because then you don't feel alone. And I do think it's fun when someone will like write in the group chat and say, hey, I'm, like you said, flying off to London. And then a bunch of us are liking the comment or saying like, all right, you got this, you can do it. It is really nice because I've been on the receiving end where I've said, okay, like I'm off to this flight, I'm nervous or whatever. And then someone chimes in and says, oh, I already flew this morning. It's all good. So anyway, it, don't just sit back, I guess is my advice, is like, don't just sit and think like, oh, I'll get over it. Or, I think the reality is it can be overcome. At least that's my experience. So don't prohibit yourself from trying, and I think that this is so helpful for people. And it's, 15 minutes of your time to do a phone call with a pilot. And, I really think it's worth trying. It really is. So that's kind of my best advice is just don't sit on the sideline, trust yourself and trust this and just give yourself the chance to possibly maybe not sweat the small stuff or like maybe not actually live in fear with this.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's fantastic. I mean, one of the things that we always tell people too is, hey, it's okay to be afraid of flying. This is something that's so complex. You're getting on a metal tube going 500 miles an hour at 40,000 feet with two people in charge you've never met before. That's scary, and it's okay to be afraid of that. So, to first take that step to acknowledge it and go, okay, you know what, I don't love this. Let me start to learn a little bit more about it and kind of tackle that head on is something that we've seen on our end has been fantastic for folks like yourself that have done that and said, oh, okay, now I understand it a little bit more. And, although some folks still will get a little bit anxious during turbulence, something like that, you now kind of have that relationship with the fact that this is going to be fine. The airplane's going to be fine. You may hear these announcements that sound scary, flight attendants, please be seated, things along those lines. But now all of a sudden the context is there. Okay, I know what's happening. I know why we're doing this. This is to mitigate the risk of smaller injuries that can happen. So, we're going to get you where you're going. And one of the things that I always tell people too is we have the same goal at the end of the day. The pilots do, and the flight crews do, everybody. And that's to get home to our families or to get where we're going, things of that nature. We always are on that same page. Let's just make sure that whatever happens, we get this airplane back on the ground safely. And there's so many factors that go into making that decision that we've already hit on. But I just think it's so important to kind of keep reiterating that. So, we're not paid by the completed flight. We're simply not. We go out, we fly our trip, we try and obviously get to where we're scheduled to go to. But if for some reason something precludes us from being able to do that, we're not going to make a decision that puts anybody in jeopardy, whether that's too much turbulence or so on and so forth. And turbulence, again, is not one that I think is a good, metaphor there, because that's not something that we really make decisions on, because we can get around turbulence, but icy runways, things of that nature that we do make decisions based on. But again, I alluded to turbulence because I hear so often from folks that is really what makes them nervous. So no, I mean, Britt, your experience has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I always appreciate when you send us emails and texts, celebrating your flights and your victories and telling us how the boys are doing. It's really fun for us to see, because again, it is, as we talked about before we recorded, it's a passion. And so it's really fun to see people traveling with confidence and being able to go where they want to go with their families. Just thanks so much for taking the time to do this. We sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. We'll talk to you soon. Once again, thanks for tuning in to the From the Flight Deck podcast from Dial a Pilot.